right, hey everybody, welcome. Before I jump in here, I just want to make sure everybody's hearing me okay. So shout out in the chat if there's any audio issues. Let me know if I'm clipping. One of these I was clipping the whole time and nobody told me, so I had to go back and clean that up. But welcome. Welcome to the second deep dive into Vectorworks Lightwright, kind of my workflow a little bit. Before we jump in and really get started, I want to show you a couple of things that we're working on right now. So a lot of you know that I've been working with Mike Berger, Rain Renshaw, and Chris Werner this week on a digital happy hour every night following the 4-Wall Virtual Vendor Showcase. So tonight's night 4 of that. And we are live tonight over at the Limelight Wired Facebook page, and we've got people from Martin, from Verilight, from TMB, from X-Laser, from HazeBase, a lot of people on the panel tonight. So we're gonna have a cool panel discussion, and then afterwards or during, you can participate in that discussion on Facebook, and we'll answer your questions, and we'll just kind of see where the night takes us. It's been really fun so far. And then next week, I will be doing a new topic. This is something that's been requested for a while. My team and I are going to jump on Zoom, and we're going to simulcast that live here on Facebook, or excuse me, on YouTube, and we're going to talk all about our process. I'm going to talk a little bit about Stamp and how we use it. That's a very frequent question that we get. Kind of show that workflow a bit. We're going to talk about how we use multi-console stuff in the EOS family, and how we've been using moving lights as follow spots recently. So definitely come check that out. But tonight, we're going to be talking about Vectorworks and Lightwright. So if you watched my deep dive, it was almost a month ago now. All of these things are kind of running together at this point. This is going to be very similar to that. It's a little bit more structured because I actually can control what's happening this time. You know, if you were with me last time, you know we had some Zoom crashers and it kind of derailed the whole thing and it was all over the place. So this is hopefully going to be a replacement of that. So this is what we're going to be talking about, not necessarily in this order. We're going to be jumping around a bit, but really I want to hear what you guys want to hear or want to know about. So as I'm going through something, if you have a question, anything like that, throw it up in the chat and I will answer it as soon as I can. We've only got about a 10-second latency tonight, which has been really great, compared to like 30 or 40 seconds, which we've had before. So fingers crossed that it stays that way. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in here, get my screen where I need it to be. Here we go. So tonight I'm going to be using Vectorworks 2020, but the stuff that I talk about is pretty much universal to any Vectorworks revision in the last couple of years. I moved over to 2020 I did my first show in 2020 a month before, or about a month ago, right as all this was hitting. And obviously I haven't done any shows since then, but I've been using it pretty successfully. There's still some bugs to be worked out, but I found that it's been working pretty well. So today we're gonna be looking at two different plots that I've worked on recently. This first one you're looking at here is Holiday Inn. This was done actually both of these shows were done at the Sandy Springs Performing Arts Center down in Atlanta with the City Springs Theater Company. So this was Holiday Inn. This was from last December. And then we're also gonna look at Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder. Whoops, I probably should have had that prepped for you. We're going to be looking at Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, which is the only show that I've done in 2020 so far, right before quarantine started. So similar things in both of them, but a little bit of different style because they were drafted by different people. So we'll talk a little bit about both of those things. But to start out, let's start talking about classes and layers. So last time when I did this, somebody had asked me how I make my position symbols. So I figured I'll start with that. I'm gonna make just a generic position symbol from scratch things, not using any necessarily the built-in tools, just to show you what's possible. And that'll kind of give you a good example of how I personally use classes. So this is a blank document. I just opened it up with nothing in it. It's still got the default classes in it. I'm gonna start out by making a couple of classes to work with here. So a good kind of rule of thumb that I like to work with is I treat classes as visual styling tools, and I treat layers as document organizational tools. So what I mean by that is a layer is something more like a sheet of vellum as you're going in and putting different pieces of your drawing together. So if we go back to the example of hand drafting, you'd always start with that ground plan of your theater would be on your first piece of paper, and then you wouldn't want to necessarily write things on top of that. You would want to put another piece of vellum on top of it to draw your scenery in, and then another piece for your lighting plots. So if you think about your layers in terms of sheets of vellum, sheets of drafting paper, I found that to be super useful. Classes, on the other hand, are things more like, imagine if I could, it's kind of hard to do with the hand drafting example, but the color of my marker that I'm using, it could be on any layer I want, but if I wanted to change all my red markers to green, I could do that really easily. So let me show you what I mean a little bit more in depth here with that. So I'm going to create a new class, and I'm going to call this lighting pipes. Okay. And I'm going to edit that class a little bit. And I'm going to say I want it to be a solid fill. We're going to go gray with that fill. Kind of choosing an arbitrary one for now. A little darker. I'm going to click the Use It Creation because that'll allow me to automatically use these classes when I'm creating objects. And I'll leave the pen style like that. So I'm going to leave that as my pipe. And I'm going to create another one and call it non-plot. Oops, non-plot. So oh, this is a great time for my computer, my keyboard batteries to die. Within Vectorworks, within classes, if you separate something with a little hyphen here with no spaces, it's going to make those kind of make a hierarchy out of that. So when I click OK here, watch what happens. It gives me a non-plot category, and then I have Loki there. So if I were to, for instance, to make another one and call this non-plot other, it's going to then group that underneath here. So what I find really useful for this is things like scenery, all of your major groupings of things that you would need, like scenery, lighting, video, all that stuff could be under a subgroup. So I should probably actually go back here and do this. So I'm going to change this to lighting, pipes, oops. And now I've got that same subgroup. And under the non-plot Loki, I'm going to edit that, and I'm going to give those no fill. And I'm going to make them like a bright green color so they really pop out. Okay, so these are really the only two classes that I need in order to start working, building this lighting position object, this lighting position symbol. So I'm going to click OK there. And I'm going to change my working class that I'm currently working in to my lighting pipe class. And then here in my attribute window, I'm going to choose my little drop down here, and I'm going to make all attributes by class. So what that's going to do is it's going to say, basically what that's going to do is it's going to do, anything that I draw now is going to reference whatever I had styled in that class. So if this, for instance, if I were to come in here and change this to solid and change it to green, or I guess I should do a different color because I did that for the Loki. If I change this to red, if I draw something now, it's going to be red. It's not going to have that gray fill that we specified earlier in that class setup. So the easy way to do that is just say all attributes by class. And now I can go ahead and start drawing. So I'm going to use the double line tool to draw a pipe. And then within the double line tool, we've got 4 little modes here that we can choose from. And this is basically just talking about where the baseline for that double line is. You've got top, center, bottom, and then custom. I basically only use the center one. So I'm gonna do the center one, and then there's a gear icon here. You can change some options, or you can change the option in the separation menu there. Most of our pipes are 2 inches in this theater, so I'm going to say 2 inches, and I'm going to choose to create a polygon. So if I create lines, it's going to create 2 separate lines for me. If I create polygons, it's going to create basically a big rectangle for me. And if I do lines and polygons, it's going to make 2 lines and a rectangle for me. So different things can, you can use those things for, those could be useful for other purposes, but for my purposes today, I just want a square. So I'm going to create polygons, click OK. And now I click and I drag, and let's say a 20-foot pipe. So I clicked and I dragged, I typed in 20 apostrophe for foot, I hit enter, and now I have this bounding box that I can choose which direction, and I want it to be right there. Oops, I'm gonna not back this up. So now I've got a pretty simple 2-dimensional object here. If I orbit into a 3D view, it's a flat square. There's no extrusion to it, anything like that. If I wanted to, I could extrude a circle. I could do all kinds of stuff to make it 3D, or I could use the lighting pipe tool, which can do a 3D object. Oh, good point. Am I in scale? Sorry, wrong thing. Question just came in about the scale that I'm working. Sorry about that. The scale that I'm working in. Right now I'm in 1/4 inch scale on this, so when I pull it into another document and put it onto a different layer, it should scale appropriately to that thing. I'll talk about when I use 1:1 scale. I do that on my title blocks, which we're going to talk about in a bit, but for the most part, everything I draft is in either 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch scale on the actual pages. So, okay, so I've got this rectangle here ready to go. I'm going to leave it as a 2-dimensional object for now. And now within that, of course, I have a center line here at the middle. I have my endpoints. And what do our fixtures usually want to be hung on? They want to be hung on 18-inch centers. So I'm going to choose my Locus Tool here, and I'm going to find that center point. Oh, before I do that, I'm going to change my working class over here to Loki. You can do that up here. You can also do this down here on the on wherever you might have your navigation window open. So I can just click and choose which one I want there. Either way is possible. Obviously, the navigation window is a little faster. And I'm going to put a Loki right there at the center. Now, as I zoom out, you see that Loki, or that locus, excuse me, changes size, so I can still see it from far away. And the reason I do this is so that I have a little point within this position that I can anchor to. I have found for my personal workflow, and I should have prefaced this whole thing, this whole stream tonight with this. What I'm showing you tonight is how I work. There are other ways to accomplish these same things. Last time I did this, I learned a couple of new things by people in the comments. I'm going to incorporate some of those tonight. But this is by no means the only way to do any of this. Not necessarily the best way to do all of it. It's the way that works for me and my team. So there's the caveat. So anyway, so I have got my center point there. And now what I can do is I can start... Can I offset a Loki? I think I can, right? I can't, because it doesn't have a direction. That's right. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to click this. I'm going to drag over. I'm going to type 18, enter. I said 18, enter. And now I've got another Loki. Sorry about that, guys. I'm gonna hold down Option and drag. My keyboard batteries are dying in the middle of this stream. They've been working perfectly all day, and now this is happening to me. 18, enter. Holding down Option and putting it... Okay, it worked that time. So I've got my center point, I've got this one here, and then you could do this multiple ways. You could duplicate along a line, or you could just kind of come in here and mirror things. The duplicate along line is going to be a faster way to do it if you have a large position, but I've only got a small thing here, so I'm just going to do this really quickly. So right there, now I have Loki going all along the edge of my pipe at 18 inches. I'm going to take those and I'm going to mirror those at center. And you could even get more creative with that if you wanted to. You could have 9 inches have different colors, but I usually leave them at the 18 inches so I have those marks and I start the one at center like that. Okay, so we've got all of those in. The other thing I usually like to do with this, because sometimes when you're zoomed really far out, it's hard to snap to the midpoint of this rectangle. So what I'll do is I'll come in here and I will draw in my lighting pipes layer, or excuse me, class, I will draw a midpoint on that pipe, like so. And then I'll either change the color to be no color, or I'll just send that to the back. Send to back. You can also do that with Command B if you're on a Mac, or Control B. So now I've got this little object here, this 10-foot pipe. It's made up of several different objects right now, right? We have all these little Loki, we have the rectangle, and we have a line. I'm going to grab that whole thing, I'm going to group it, and then I'm going to come into modify, and I'm going to create that as a symbol. So we'll call this a 10-foot pipe. I'm going to then choose what how I want to have my insertion point. So if you do it center, it's going to find the exact center of that object, which is probably what we want for this. I usually use next mouse click, and that allows you to specify where you want that point to be. So for instance, if I wanted the insertion point to be over here on the end and I clicked there, whenever I reinsert that symbol, it's going to be over here at the end. But let's go ahead and just do it at the center, just like that. And we'll put it right in that folder. And now I've got a symbol. And so now if I open up my resource browser, wrong drawing, I can now put that pipe in anywhere in my drawing that might need it. Just like that. So typically when we work in the same venue over and over, we've made all the positions for that particular venue already. And we don't have to, we can move them around, we can bring them out of the resource browser. So that's why I typically don't, I end up working in a lot of the same places over and over. So I don't use necessarily the lighting device or the lighting position tool, lighting pipe tool. I like the simple option. Of course with the lighting device tool, you can do all kinds of cool, complex things like that. But to me, it's just faster to do it the other way. And yeah, there's some comments in here about using move and copy. Any way you go about making those things happen, it's very possible. So then the question is, why did we put these Loki on that? Why did we name that class non-plot? Why are we doing that? So I use a complex series of viewports in my drawings. So A viewport is basically a window from a design layer that you can place on a sheet layer. So if we go over here to, let's go to the Gentleman's Guide plot for a second. The sheet layers that I have up here at the top, if we look at this organization, these are all basically pieces of paper. For me, this goes back to when I started working in AutoCAD a long time ago, and it was the idea of having paper space versus model space. You had all this, you had an infinite bound of model space, you could draw anything you wanted, and then you would use viewports to take those things from that model space and put them into your paper space. So that is the same kind of concept that I follow here. So when we're looking at this sheet layer, this first page of my plot, I actually have a couple of different viewports going on here. So I've got one viewport that is showing me my title block. I've got another viewport that is showing me my actual stage view here. And within those viewports, I can choose which classes and which layers to show, which ones to gray out, which ones to not show at all. So for instance, if I click on this, if I zoom in on this plot, you can see I've got some lighting pipes there, right? Don't see any of those green Loki there, but if I come in, I click on that, and I enable that class, they still don't show up. That's an excellent, I don't know why that happened, but they would, what an evening I'm having so far. They would normally show up there. So I'm able to go, maybe these positions didn't have them. It's also very possible. But I'm able to pick and choose what I want to see on those particular pages. So really quickly, you can see how powerful of a tool that can be. And the same thing with layers. So if I didn't want to have scenery on this particular page of my plot, I could come into that layer, I could turn off, let's say scenery on the deck, scenic units, turn all that stuff off. And now all I have is my plot. And so instead of, you know, if for those of you who do a whole bunch of pages in your design, on your design or your model space in your design layers, and you try to lay those all out, it can be really hard to make that happen because you have to copy paste data, you have to move your page borders around all the time. Doing it this way allows me to have several different pages worth of that plot and just turn on layers, turn on classes that I need on that page only. So if we go out to our actual, we'll call it model space, I guess, or design layers for this plot. Computer is slow when I'm doing the streaming. Normally it doesn't take as long in Vectorworks for me here. So you can see I've got a whole lot of data going on here. Anything that I'm drawing is here. I don't have, you know, I do have a page boundary here, but it's not actually referencing it. Like I'm not using that for anything. Instead, I'm using those sheet layers and I'm popping these pieces of the drawing that I want onto those sheet layers and changing my classes, changing my layers to make it be the thing that I want it to be. So how do we do that is the next question. So for example, let's say I wanted to make a sheet layer that had this little call out, this little scenic detail on it. It's pretty simple. I'm going to use really any polygon tool. I usually use a rectangle because that's the shape that I need, but if you needed to do some kind of cool cut with a polygon, other kind of polygon, you could do that. I'm going to draw a rectangle over top of that. Don't care about that fill, don't care about anything. Basically what I'm using that rectangle for is a selection tool for what I'm putting into that viewport. Then I'm going to go to View. I'm going to go to Create Viewport. And then it's going to ask me, do I want to use the object that I just created or that I have selected to use that as the crop for the viewport? So I'm going to say yes. Once I do that, that box actually goes away. It doesn't show up in my drawing anymore. I'm just using it as a selection tool. So now within here, I can choose sheet layers that I already have to place that on, or I can make a new one. So I'm going to make a new one, and I'm going to call that, let's say, detail. Okay. And click OK. And now in a second, once my computer catches up with me here, it's going to pop me over to this piece of paper that I had specified in my setup already for the size. And now I've got this viewport with the stuff that was visible in that square ready to go. So I could come in here, I could, again, turn things on and off if I wanted to. I could also change the scale of this. This is where this comes in super handy, because let's say I had a production electrician who wanted a plot that was on Arc E size paper, right? It had 3x4 size paper, but I had another part of the team that needed a smaller size. I could lay those out as sheet layers, and if they're referencing those viewports, I can change that scale really easily without having to go in and make multiple copies of anything or change design layer scales. I've seen people do that. I've seen people change entire design layer scales just to create another plot. don't have to do any of that. You can do that all with sheet layers. So like if I wanted this to fill this entire piece of paper, I can just kind of keep going up until I find something that fits. Well, that kind of fits. So I could make this fill up this whole 3x4 piece of paper if I wanted to. So that's kind of viewports in a nutshell. You can get more complicated with it. Like I said, you can do custom selections. If you're drafting in 3 dimensions, you can do section viewports. Most of the stuff that I am working on is drafted in 2 dimensions. So all of my Vectorworks files are usually in 2 dimensions. You notice that if I zoom back out here for a second, like I could orbit around on this and maybe some of my stuff is going to be in 3-dimensional space. And I'm going to explain why that is in a second. But like my theater is flat. You know, I've got a couple positions there, but you know, there's a couple of the doors from wherever this DWG import happened to come in there. And of course my fixtures have geometry, but everything is done in 2D there. And that is just honestly because of the nature of the work that my team and I have been doing. We haven't really had a need to do full 3-dimensional drafting in Vectorworks on most of our shows. Now I've done 3-dimensional stuff in Vectorworks, don't get me wrong, but the plots we're creating are pretty much only 2D. When I need that 3D representation, typically we're turning to SketchUp or something like that for our scenic models, and then using Capture to do all of our lighting objects and stuff like that. I actually have, if you go down on my YouTube page, there is a video where I do a Vectorworks to Capture workflow. So taking all of, I think it was actually this plot you're looking at right now, this Gentleman's Guide plot. We took this all 2-dimensional stuff, exported that in 3 dimensions over to Capture. So I won't go super into depth on that today because you can go watch that video. Question here, how do you get your lights to look like they're in 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional page, like for when you do your sections? That's an excellent point. So I'll go ahead and move over to sections. I was going to cover that later, but that seems like a natural point to go to here. So the question was basically, how do we get these cool 3-dimensional looking, 3-dimensional looking objects in my section view? So I use a program called Savvy Section, and I will throw, on the replay for this, I'll throw that link up in the description. If anybody has the link to Josh's website where you can download this, please throw it in the chat now for people. But Savvy Section is a really awesome tool. I think it's like $30 or so, and it allows you to create flattened 3-dimensional imagery, or two-dimensional flattened imagery of 3D Vectorworks lighting objects. So let me show you how that works real quick. So down here, I've got it installed as my plugin. If I just click that, this little tool that I have, and let's say I want to put this fixture here, I put that fixture in, and now over here in my object info palette, which I'm going to make a little bit bigger so everybody can see it, I'm able to choose what kind of symbol that is. So I can say, that's a source 4. And bam, all of a sudden, I have a 2-dimensional representation of that source 4 ready to go. And the cool part about this is, in the olden days of this, we all had, a couple of years ago, we all had a library of these flattened 2-dimensional symbols for all of these different things. We had them this way, we had them up, we had them down, we had them facing us. With this plugin, we're able to change all of those options here in the object info palette. So if I want this to be a 5 degree, I just change the barrel to a 5 degree barrel. If it's a 10 degree, I change the barrel to a 10 degree barrel, et cetera, et cetera. It has all of these built-in options. If I want it to be a source 4 mini, I could do that. Of course, a massive C clamp on there. Has basically all of, oh, you guys can't post well list. All right, I will, I disabled that because of the spam protection. So when I get a little break here, I will post the link to Josh's website so you guys can find that. Definitely worth the thing. So yeah, so Samuel, this is an excellent point. This doesn't create phantom lights in Lightwright. So you don't have to worry about your symbol stuff being, your symbols getting messed up and having more of this fixture than that fixture. This is a totally separate instance. It is they are symbols, but they are not lighting instruments, so they will not show up in your Lightwright. So the other cool thing about this, in addition to changing my barrel sizes and all of that, I can also come in here and I can change what view I'm looking at that from. So if it's like a box boom fixture and it's kind of at a 45, I could do that. If it's a side light and it's coming right at me, I can change it to be this way. I can then come in here and I can rotate that within that symbol. Whoops. Boom, now it's facing me directly on. It even has cool things like adding scrollers. Let me change it back to a 45 degree view to really show you the power here. I can come in here, I can add a scroller to it. I had scrollers on a plot as recently as last month before the show got canceled. It might give me a scroller. Vectorworks is struggling with me here today. There it goes. So it gave me a little colorgram there. And of course, then within scrollers, I can choose different options. I could choose a CXI if I wanted to. God, I haven't used a CXI in probably 10 years now. And then on top of all of that cool stuff, you also can change the kind of yoke. So if you've short yoked your fixture, you've moved it up a couple of holes, you can do that. You can change what your handle style is. So if you've got bolts instead of the clutch, you can do that. You can also change your clamp. So if this is on a T, like on a sidearm, you can do that. You can do a T from the side. You can do all these you get the idea, right? There's all these different things you can do with it, and it's way better than just having a bunch of symbol objects and changing them. Because if I have to change my entire front light system out to 10 degrees instead of 14 degrees or something like that, I could just choose them all, change it to this, and it would be done pretty quickly. So the other cool thing that this can do, and I'm hoping that it can do this without crashing Vectorworks, because my computer does not like streaming at the same time, is any Vectorworks symbol, any built-in Vectorworks symbol that has 3D geometry to it, you're able to use this tool on. So for instance, I dropped this in here by default, and up here where it says instrument type, I'm going to say selected symbol, and I'm going to choose which symbol I want. So let's just find something that is in the Vectorworks library. How about a Mac 250? So we're going down old school here with the scrollers anyway. Let's do a Mac 250, one of the first moving lights I used. So you say, okay, well, that looks really dumb. That doesn't look like anything right now. But I can come over here and I can choose I want this to be a flattened 3D symbol. There we go. And I can add a gray fill to it. That's going to take a second for my computer to render. There it goes. And it's a pretty, this doesn't look exactly like a Studio Spot did, but it's relying on the geometry that Vectorworks has built in. So for any light that you've got a 3D symbol for, you can use this tool to create a section view for. Now there's some of them that didn't look good. So like we had some Vipers on this show. So like we made a Viper symbol. I don't know why that's not gray, actually. I should fix that. So this, of course, we did it the old fashioned way. We got the DWG from Martin. We copy pasted the stuff into a Vectorworks file. We graded out, we deleted all the unnecessary stuff. If you want that kind of level of detail that doesn't exist, you still have to make them yourself. And of course, that's just a symbol that doesn't have any savvy section objects for it. But hopefully that answers that question. That helps a little bit. It also is really nice because then you can stack things, right? So like here's a D60. So it's actually a color source par is what it's supposed to be, but I just use the D22 symbol because it looks pretty similar. And then there's a luster behind it, and it's little things, like you've got a luster hanging there, you've got the little extra body on it. It's super, super detailed. You can see the Skittles and the D60 lens here. Again, that was actually a color source, so it's not exactly perfect, but you get the idea. William asked, is it PC and Mac? That's actually a really great question. I'm not 100% sure. Let me go ahead while we're here and open this up. Stand by. The plugin is called Savvy Section. So you can probably just Google Savvy Section. Close my Reddit Tech Theater moderation queue here. And this is his website. So this is where you can get it. I'm going to post this. Well, I'm on two different computers, one for the chat and one for this, so I can't paste this link in the thing, but I promise I will. But you can see, like anything that's anything that you can possibly have a 3D object for, you can use this tool for. And it's currently $35, and that's the best $35 I've ever spent. Saved me so much time and made my plots and stuff look so much nicer. And of course, there's a student license for $10 as well. And then while you're on Josh's website, check out all this other stuff. He's got all kinds of other plugins that he has. I haven't used any of the other ones personally, but I know a lot of people who do for line sets and position labels and stuff, and they swear by them. So cool stuff there. And I will put the link up in the description as soon as this video is done today. So in my section, you can see I draft my section sideways here, off to the side. The stuff you see up here is actually leftovers from a previous show, and this is us just kind of pulling stuff in and out from where we needed them. And again, because we're using those viewports, anything that's up here, this isn't actually getting printed on any pieces of paper. Here's a Sola 1000 that we pulled in from a DWG, right? So it's just kind of like this like holding area for other stuff that we're not using. I'm able to use those viewports and use the viewport layers and class options to show what I want to show and what I don't. So I like to draft my sections in 2 dimensions off here to the side. It's awesome when I get something from the Scenic Designer already. Most of the shows that I'm working on, we do get, we get that drafting from the Scenic Designer. If I was going back and redoing this, I would probably clean up some of the colors from that DWG, put this plot together relatively quickly, so I never really did that. But you see why. I mean, it's kind of obnoxiously colored there with that neon green. And then I start, the easiest way to do this is to draw reference lines over from your ground plan. So if any of you have ever used that, probably everybody who's gone to school for theater design has used this book before, drafting for the theater. There's exercises in here where, you draw your top view, your side view, your top view, your section view, and your front view, and then you're able to draw reference lines off of that to give yourself 3-dimensional or give like an isometric view. Sorry, that was a confusing sentence. So I do a very similar thing for this. So let's just do a demo example over here with a blank stage. Here's my stage. Let's say I had a piece of scenery that was this big. Again, I'm looking at it in a plan view here. And then if I want to draw a section, I'm just going to draw some reference lines over. Now there's the bottom of my stage. Here's my scenery, like so. And of course, I don't know the height, so it's just a rough. But I can quickly draw those reference lines over to figure that stuff out. I'll do the same thing with a lighting position. So like, let's say this ladder is going to go right there. I might click on my corner and just draw a big reference line out there, just temporarily to use. Whoa. And now I can line up. Oh, it actually looks like that's not perfectly lined up, but I can line up that 2-dimensional objects with that. So where this comes in handy for me, one of the tools that I really use for this is my line set here. So I use a symbol for our line sets, and I again, we work in a lot of the same venues over and over. So I have a line set schedule symbol for this particular venue, and when I come in here and I edit this, any edit that I make on it is referenced then on this section line set as well as my ground plan line set, because it's just another symbol instance. So I can come in here, I could change, let's say this was now going to be called, let's just call it the number 1E or something like that. Of course, my keyboard didn't work again. It's going to be really fun to try to finish this thing without a fully working keyboard today. Wait for my computer to catch up with me here. And now that change that I've made here, because I was editing that symbol, is now edited here on this as well. So it allows me, like, I don't have to draw a whole bunch of reference lines over from my ground plan. I can have this, and I can draw my electrics just in this quick little view here. Now, of course, as you're working with this, it can, you find yourself turning your head back and forth a lot. So you can actually rotate the Vectorworks view up here in the top. So I'm going to change this to 90 degrees. And now I've spun all the way around, and I can work on this kind of with my head facing straight up. Right, take that back to 0. Now, of course, to type in all that stuff can get tedious. So what I like to do for that is I use saved views. So if you're not using saved views, I won't call it a hidden feature, but it's, I know a lot of people that have never heard of it. Saved views are these little things here right next to all of your class and layer information. So a saved view basically saves what you're looking at, zoom level, class visibilities, layer visibilities, rotation, all of that stuff in even what sheet layer or what design layer you're on is all saved into that saved view. So let's say I wanted this to be like my, bird's eye view of everything. I turn on the things that I want. I could then come in here and save that, and we're going to call this bird's eye. And now let's say I wanted a section working view. I'll change this to 90 degrees rotation, and maybe I'll zoom in a bit on my stage here in the section where I'd actually be working. And I'll save that view as section. So now I can switch back and forth between those things really quickly if I wasn't streaming at the same time, and it'll recall all of those various things for me. And then, of course, within the organization manager here, you can go in and you can edit those things a little bit further. You can choose which layers are on. So if you made a mistake, you can go in and update those things. So you can see in my drawing here, if I leave this open for a second, I have several saved views depending on what I'm working on. So I've got the section view, I've got a practicals, I've got set electrics, which are kind of the same thing in the show, overheads, motors, stuff like that. The reason why that comes in handy is because like if we zoom in on this stage part of the plot here, you notice that this is kind of a jumbled mess of information right now because I've got multiple layers turned on. If I turn off all my deck stuff here, electrics wise, you can see now it's a little bit clearer to read. But because, again, I'm using that viewport system, all this stuff exists in the same three-dimensional space based on my origin point there. It all exists, but I'm referencing it in the viewports. So if I'm working and I want to turn this stuff on and off really quickly, it's easier to save a view with that stuff turned on and off than it is to necessarily go in and change those visibilities each time. So like, for example, if I only wanted to work on the deck stuff now, I would have to come in and I would have to turn off overhead instruments. I'd have to turn off overhead positions. I'd have to turn on deck instruments. I'd have to select deck instruments, a bunch of clicks, or I could save that all as a saved view, including where I was, and it will all just zoom to there. So save views, highly recommend them if you're not already using them in your work. And it also saves like I said, the active layer. So whatever you have your little checkbox in, it'll jump you right back there. So it really speeds up your workflow that way. Next question, do I let Vectorworks count my lights and symbols automatically? So this is a good segue into title block. So I got a couple of questions on Instagram and in the comments here about my title blocks, how I lay them out. So I'm going to get to that exact question about counting lights in a second because it's part of the title blocks, but let's take a look at that. So we'll look at, for this example, let's go back over here to this Holiday Inn plot. So you notice you don't see anything title block related. I can zoom all the way out. There's nothing title block to be found here. If I open up my drawing organization, you'll see that I have a series of layers. These are all 1/4-inch layers. I've got some layers that just have lines as labels, and those are basically just spacers for visual organization in the organizational tool. You could put objects on them, obviously, but all they really do is break up my major sections here. I got my rigging, my lighting, scenery, etc., etc. But at the very bottom here, I have a title block layer that is set to 1:1. So if I go over and I make that my active layer, you can see because it's a different scale than everything else, all of the rest of my drawing will go away. So the reason this is 1:1 is because I want to be able to talk in real world units to what my page size is going to be using. So if I go to my page setup here, I see that this is a 36 by 24 piece of paper. I want to be able to come in here and say, okay, then I want a 3-inch line and have that be a 3-inch line on that piece of paper. Whoops, what did I do? Oh, there we go. Those are another really great tool if you're not familiar with it. This fit to page area. If you click that button, it'll fit everything onto your, zooms into everything that's on your page size. And you can also do fit to object, so it'll zoom into anything you have on your drawing. So if you accidentally have zoomed way out for some reason, you click one of those two buttons, it's going to bring you back. Kind of like a zoom to fit if you're, on an MA, for example, zoom to fit on your layout view, same thing. So within this title block layer, I have this cool page border. Again, this is just a group. I have this. Some of the files I have multiple ones of these, so I have one for different size pieces of paper. But it's just a group of it's a couple of rectangles with letters in them and some fills. The reason I do this border is to make it really easy to reference parts of the plot on a really complicated drawing over the phone or in a meeting. So, for example, if a production electrician is looking at a really complicated set electric drawing or something like that, it's almost like a coordinate grid system. We can say, all right, well, look at D2 and see exactly what I'm talking about. So it's just a way to kind of like a wayfinding thing within my sheet layers to be able to see where they are. Not necessary at all, but it's there. And then other things I have in here, I have kind of all of my default title block stuff is here. So I've got page size, you notice I've got an empty box here. I'm going to talk about why that is in a second. I've got information about my show there. I've got everything you can possibly think of. This actually has an old logo on it. I should go over to the Gentleman's Guide one here for this. Bloop, bloop. Here we go. So I've got production credits here, I've got anything that needs to appear on basically any page is going to be showing up on this design layer. So revision history, right? Every time I issue a new revision of drawings, that revision history should be on every single page of the drawing. So I don't want to update that on every single page. I want to put that in here. Now you can absolutely do this with a symbol too, and update the symbol and have that symbol referenced. That's a 100% okay way of doing it. I've just happened to do this this design layer thing forever, and so this is the way that I've been doing it. Moving up from there, then you've got a little logo block here. You've got your show information. Really, of course, whatever you want. I should probably turn off these notifications. Oops. Okay. Et cetera, et cetera. General notes, I find, if it's a note that's going to be on every single piece of paper, if it goes here, otherwise I would leave the box blank. And then finally, to get to TJ, I guess it's TJ is your name, question here, the symbol key. So yes, I use the built-in symbol key to make a quick symbol key, or built-in instrument information, or what's it called? Instrument summary, that's the word I'm looking for. I use the built-in instrument summary tool to make this for me really quickly. So within this, if you're not familiar with it, you basically can go in, you can choose, it has a list of every symbol you're using in your show. You can pull those in here, and you can even choose show me quantities, show me wattages, show me all that kind of stuff. So there we go. There's the quantities in here. Something I learned on the last one of these that I did, because I was always frustrated that you couldn't edit this any further. If you take this built-in key, you get it exactly how you want it. You make sure you have all your symbols there, and you go to edit, or you right-click, or excuse me, modify, and then you do ungroup. It's then going to take and actually break all of these things out as separate objects for you. And it's going to reference your fixture symbols, but not as lighting device objects. So again, the question that came in earlier about will this mess up your Lightwright integration? It won't, because it's still a symbol, but it's not a lighting object. So it's not going to matter. So I can come in here, and then I can move this stuff around. For example, like I don't necessarily want all of this here, so maybe I would rotate this. Or I think in this case I had like a little white box that I put over top of it, with a little cheating way to do it there. All of these things, I could change this to just be, I could say CS linear, all that kind of stuff. I could do this. The problem with doing that ungrouping now is that's it. Like I can't go back in here. Even if I regroup this, it's not going to become an instrument summary anymore. So use that at your own risk, right? You don't, if you're constantly updating a plot, I wouldn't necessarily do that, because now I'm going to have to go back in and update it again. Or maybe what you could do is, before you ungroup it like that, make a copy of it so you have a backup copy of it, ungroup it, and then do it so you're not starting from scratch every single time you're making this key. So for most of my plots, this particular theater, we put the same key on every page. So I'm not as worried about specific keys for specific pages. The standard is you should only have lights on the key that are on that page. I find that I just leave it. I mean, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Now, if I was doing like a scenic practical plate or something like that, then I don't need all this information in there, so I might not put that on that particular page. So, okay, so all that to be said, what I will then do is I will create another viewport of this entire thing, and I'll drop that onto my sheet layer at the very bottom of that sheet layer. I also have this cool watermark here. So if I'm doing an early draft of that, I drag this up into here, into that viewport, and that'll show up then on every page of my plot. I don't have to go in and update that everywhere. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if I go here over to my overhead plot view, earlier, I showed you I dragged this one off, but here's a viewport back to that, and you can see that thing kind of lives outside of this. If I were to recrop this viewport, you see it's down there. So if I move it up inside of there, then it becomes a watermark on all my drawings. So you noticed earlier I had those white boxes. Those are the things that I update from page to page. So I have a page number here, I have a scale here, I have the contents here. Those are really the only things. And again, sometimes the notes, depending on what the show is, will also be editable. But everything else is a direct viewport reference back to that design layer. Now again, you could do this exact same thing with a symbol. You could have a title block symbol, and you could have that symbol on all of your pages. 100%. You could even make it where, this was an editable field in your symbol. I try to shy away from doing the editable fields within symbols. You know, if we look at let's go to our overhead positions layer, for example. For a while, I was using instrument position labels that were symbols that you could edit. You know, you could come into data here, you could type in the name. But what I found is that you know, if the name was a little bit longer than you wanted it to be, you couldn't make a really quick one-time edit of that particular thing because you were referencing that symbol. So I kind of keep that same philosophy when I use my design layer viewport stuff for my title block. I'd rather just be able to edit it in a one-time thing and not have to deal with having 3 different symbols based on what size font I need at that time. So like these position labels, all these are groups with a text box and then some objects behind them with a fill. You know, Vectorworks has a lot of really great built-in tools. I use some of them. Other ones, I keep it really simple. You know, it works. And for me, it's like as long as the show can get hung and the plot can be maintained in an efficient way, great. So yeah. So let's see, what else do we need to talk about? We talked about classes. Let me pull this little thing over here. We talked about classes and layers. We talked about title blocks. We talked about sheet layers. We talked about viewports. Kind of showed you the resource. I showed you the line set schedule a little bit. You know, within my base drawing, organization is the key for me for everything. So you see, like I've got, you know, everything is labeled with a prefix of what it is. You noticed earlier when I was looking at these, you know, I've got my initials by there in case anybody else has saved views. You know, when we're working in shared files, anything that's specific to a person, we put our initials in front of it. It's the same thing in here with classes. I think the classes in this drawing got a little messed up by the scenery. Yeah, they did. But same thing, like everything has got a hierarchy, so it's easy to find what you're looking for. You know, especially when you're dealing with importing architectural drawings or scenic drawings, sometimes you can have hundreds of classes and all this stuff, and that's one of my least favorite things is to clean all that stuff up, but I feel like I spend a lot of time doing it when I'm drafting. So anyway, so within, speaking to that organization, if I open my resource browser back up, you can see keep the resource browser just as organized. Now, of course, these two things came in here just because we just made them, but the only symbol that I have that's not within a folder is this line set schedule. Everything, and I could even put that in a folder if I wanted to, but anything that's specific to the show goes into a folder. Anything that's specific to the theater, you know, of course, I should probably spend some time cleaning up all of this crap here. This is all just stuff that came in from the architectural drawings of the theater, but it doesn't bloat the file size too much, so I just leave it in a folder. Maybe one day we'll retrace it or something, but not important right now. And same thing, all my fixtures, they're all organized here by what they are. All of the base stuff for all these, they're in their own folder. So if I need to make a sweeping change to what a source 4 looks like, I could do that. I use you probably recognize some of these symbols. I use Steve Shelley's soft symbols. I've edited most of them to kind of be a little bit of a different visual style. But if you're not familiar, just Google Steve Shelley soft symbols and you can buy, I think, manufacturer packs for like $30 or so. And by now I've just built up a really big library of all of them. But kind of think of this as like nested data or reference data. If you know, a lot of the people watching this are probably theater people, you're probably EOS people, or if you're any kind of lighting programmer, you're familiar with the concept of nested data, right? Presets, palettes, stuff like that. So you've got these base symbols here, like here's the body of a source 4, and then all of my other symbols that are a source 4, for example, like all of these guys here, then go back and reference that same thing. So if I want to make a change to every single symbol, I could update that base thing, and they would all be updated. The only thing that's different about these is the little lens designations on them. They're really the only thing. Actually, it looks like some of the symbols got deleted from this. I should have a full library of 750s here. I'm not quite sure why that is not there. Let's see here. Open up my actual base file. Question came in, how do I make the black circle show up for template on my instruments? I'll get to that in 1 second. All right, so let's switch over here to the base file, fixtures. Now, here's a better example. So here, all my 750s, all of these symbols, the only thing that's unique about these symbols is that they have these little lines and stuff on them. The symbols themselves all reference back to that base fixture, that source 4 750 body. And it's the same thing for all of my other things. If I want to change what a luster designation looks like, I can do that once. in this, and then it's referenced on all of my various luster fixtures throughout the entire show. So very, very powerful. But again, organization is absolutely key when it comes to this stuff. I keep all my label legends in a folder, all my containers in a folder. Everything you can put in a folder, put in a folder. I hate seeing a whole bunch of just crap in the resource browser here. It drives me nuts. Now, of course, then you say you organize all that stuff all nice, and then you come in here and you try to change. Let's just put a random lighting instrument in. And you go to try to change, I'm on a 1-to-1 scale. If I try to replace that device, now, of course, now it's doing it. One of these different menus frustrates me because it shows you, it's in the Savvy section menu, actually. It shows you every symbol in your show and doesn't give you your browser, but I can deal with it. It's fine. Okay, so black circles showing up as templates on my instruments. So I played around for a while with, making that an accessory. And depending on what kind of show I'm doing, sometimes I still will leave it as an accessory. And so it's basically like a scroller, like anything else you'd attach as an accessory to your instrument. And where that comes in handy is for counting purposes. So when I do like my outdoor project where we're renting every single piece of gear, I need an accurate count of gobo holders. And sure, I could count up the gobos, but I like to have multiple sources of data to make sure that they agree with one another. So I would add, I had just a little black circle symbol, and it was a lighting accessory device type, and I could just go in and associate it with that fixture, and then it would show up as an accessory in Lightwright. That's one way to do it. Honestly, on these are Dalton's triangles, actually. We use little triangles for this now. It's just an object. And as we're going through, I do a pass over the plot right before I generate the final paperwork, where I go instrument by instrument down a pipe, make sure everything about it is accurate. And we just drop that symbol of that little triangle in. We don't associate it as a lighting accessory necessarily anymore. But that's all there is to it. You could probably get creative. I'm sure somebody smarter than me could do it with a label legend where if there was or with a script or something where if there's a gobo, then it shows up. That's probably definitely possible. But again, I'm just keeping it simple. Okay, let's go back to our list here. I'm hovering around 30 viewers or so far all night. So thank you all for being here. Hopefully this has been somewhat useful for some of you. It's kind of hard to do like a 1,000-foot view of this program that has a million different things and a million different ways of doing things. So hopefully you'll get a little bit of something out of it. Okay, so let's talk about two more things real quick, and that's calculating beam spreads and going back and forth with Lightwright, because I haven't really talked about Lightwright at all. So actually, there's in the Holiday Inn thing here, there's a really good example of this, and I've showed this a couple of times in recent webinars. So we've got our section view drawn off to the side here. You can do the exact same thing with a front view. So up here above this, basically what we've done is we've drawn our stage. This line right here represents the floor of our stage. We have 3 little boxes. These represent people. So I could actually use a person in that if I wanted to. I could come in here and grab my person, give them a little rotation. I'm trying not to use keyboard shortcuts during these webinars so you can see the tools better. So there's a person, right, instead of a box. And then what I can do is I can start drawing lighting pipes on the Z-axis here. Again, this is looking at like a front view. And then I can start drawing these cones to see exactly what lights I need, but size-wise. Sorry, I hit page down accidentally. I can see what lights I need size-wise, and I can also see how big a particular light is going to be when it hits. So if I draw a line, let's say I know I want a light right here, and I draw a line straight through that person's head, I can now come off of that with a cone. Say I wanted to cover that much area, I could then come in here and measure the angle of that cone, and no, that's a 27-degree cone. I probably need a 26-degree fixture for that, or maybe a 36 if I absolutely need that extra little degree for whatever reason. And you can start layering these things one on top of one another to see exactly what your fixtures are going to do in that space. So if you want a better example of this, I did a webinar. This was actually my second webinar I did a month or so ago. It's called Plots and Paperwork Basics, and I do a demo with a piece of paper where you can calculate this with a piece of paper holding up to your eye. And I don't know if I drew this in there. I think I drew this demo in there as well, where you can see I could lay out an entire lighting system this way. And let's say I had to move this pipe 12 feet in the air for whatever reason. I can just redraw this cone And boom, that angle now, of course, has changed. I could remeasure it and see. So that's an easy way to get a two-dimensional, to figure out your beam spread in 2 dimensions. Now, of course, if you're doing this, you also have to be aware, this is going to give me my stage left, stage right dimension, but I need to be aware of what it's going to do upstage, downstage as well. So I could do that using the section view. I could do that kind of with the ground plan, depending on where you're working. But a really easy way to do that is to actually use use your three-dimensional space within Vectorworks. So just to save a little processing power, I'm just going to go back to our kind of crappy example of a stage here. I'm going to pull in our lighting position here that we had, our 10-foot pipe we made earlier. And to open and close that resource browser, I'm just hitting Control-R, or excuse me, Command-R, because I'm on a Mac. So right there's a position. I'm going to actually transform that into a lighting position. Call that the front of house. Ignore that ugly label. Now, of course, again, if I go around in three-dimensional space, everything is kind of on that flat plane, right? If I then come in and I start adding some symbols, so let's pull in, let's say from the base file, let's put in a source 4750. Let's do a 19 degree. Let's put one here. I'm going to put one at the center of my pipe, and one at this end of my pipe. And now I start orbiting around. You see those symbols have attached themselves to that pipe. They're hanging straight down. They're kind of going down through the floor. That's a little annoying. But what I can do, ignore this thing over here. I have this fun glitch, and I don't know if everybody has this, but every once in a while when I'm working with symbols, I get like this ghost symbol. It doesn't actually exist. It's like a rendering error in Vectorworks. Maybe I need to update service packs or something, but it's been happening for a few months now. It's been driving me nuts. Anyway, so I've got these 3 fixtures here. I can actually come in here with this pipe, give it a Z value, let's say 20 feet in the air, and because those fixtures are attached to that pipe, they're going to move around with it. So now as I come down here into my three-dimensional view, you can see that pipe is 20 feet in the air. It's pretty big for our stage. So let's move it down to, let's say, 12 feet. I got a small black box space. Okay. So even if you're not doing your entire plot in 3 dimensions, it's super simple to come in here and just put your lighting positions into 3 dimensions. And if you watch my video on taking from Vectorworks into Capture, this is one of the steps of that. I'm going to move entire positions into that 3D space, and then that gives that, now these fixtures all have 3-dimensional data associated with them, which is super cool. So then again, the question is, well, how do I figure out how big this light is going to be when I turn it on? You can use your focus point tool in Vectorworks for this. So I'm going to make a focus point that's right here, center on this stage. We're going to call that focus point A, and it's going to be 6'6" in the air. That's a pretty tall person. Let's say 6 foot instead. And now again, if I go into an orbit view here, you see I've got that thing right there, that focus point at 6 foot in the air. And everything is filling in with that dark fill because I'm still in my lighting pipe class. If I was doing this for real, I'd have classes for the focus areas, etc., etc. Now, if I take these 3 symbols and I associate those with focus point A, you notice in 2 dimensions, they don't rotate at all. If I just switch this over to, let's say, a top view, you can see now they're pointing at that particular focus area. Cool, right? So now what I can do, I can go light by light, and I can say, draw beam. Ooh, I can draw it as a 3D solid if I wanted to. And now when I go to orbit, it's giving me a 3D solid object. But wait a second, it's being cut off by that focus point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say fall off point, and it's basically going to go all the way down from there. I don't know why it didn't go all the way down. But you get the idea, right? So you can really quickly start to see how powerful this can be. So if I go back to my plan view here, I can see exactly where that fixture. I can see the beam angle and the field angle of that fixture, and exactly both what they're going to hit on the floor and what they're going to hit at my focus area. So if I just want the focus area, I can do that, or if I just want the fall off point, I can do that. So I can start turning all of these on with that same thing, and I can start seeing how that overlaps. And I say, okay, well, that's actually really small. Maybe I should change this to a different fixture. I'm going to replace that device. I'm going to make it a 90 degree instead. And boom, now I've covered my entire, my entire space with light. Cool. So it's a really easy way to do that. Now, one thing, I've got a couple of questions there I will get to, but you've noticed as I've been going through this object info palette, it's been kind of annoying to like scroll around and find all of these various things that I need. I've got a whole lot of stuff in here that I don't need. I don't need Gobo 2. I don't need I don't need a lot of this data. I want the stuff that I need, that I use often up towards the top. So you can actually go to Spotlight Preferences, Parameters under Lighting Devices, and within this Show in Shape pane, I can select and deselect different things that I don't want. So for example, focus was all the way here at the bottom. I want that. I could actually move that all the way up to the top here if I wanted to, and then when I click OK, now my object info palette has changed. So if you're doing a simple show and all you have is focus positions, channels, dimmers, addresses, and types and color, you could turn everything else off and have just those fields, and obviously position and unit and stuff. So that can be really powerful to be able to just see the information you need. If in my base file I have that set up already. Of course, this was coming from an empty file when we started this, so that's why it wasn't like that, and because I wanted to show you the example. So definitely customize your workspace for that. The other cool thing, Don Fox emailed me after my last one of these. He's another designer, and he gave me this really awesome tip that you are able to this cool setting that I haven't used on a show yet. Also, within Spotlight Preferences, you're able to automatically assign classes to your lighting fixtures based on fields in their data. So if I wanted to have purpose classes that, again, through saved views or even through, let's say, a viewport, I could turn on and off, you could definitely do that. So I'm going to play around with that on the next show that I do, whenever that is. I was supposed to do 7 shows in the last 2 months, and every single one of them was canceled. So as soon as I get a show, I'm going to play around with that, and I'll let you all know how it is. But I'm excited for that, because there's times where, yeah, I might only want to, not necessarily on a plot view, but on a working thing. If I want to go a system at a time, what an awesome tool to be able to use for that. So a couple of questions here. How do you edit the color and pen of a focus palette? Same way you would anything. So if I just drag this over here where we can see it, of course, if I drag it, all my lights refocus. So let me turn off our beams for a second. It was automatically created with the style that I had, because I was by class. So if I had a focus point, let's do that real quick. I can come in here. I'm going to make a focus point class. Lighting focus point. And let's say I want to give it, just so we really see it in this particular example, we'll make it bright yellow, and it'll have a blue pen. Never be able to read it, but you get the idea. So now if I come in here and I reassociate that class that I just made with this object, or I associate the object with the class, boom, there it is. If I wanted to do a one-off edit on it, again, remember when we set up our attributes in the very beginning and we talked about how you can do all attributes by class? You can remove all of that and then come in here and do manual overrides on it. So I can change whatever I want. I could even just say, let's say I wanted to have a custom fill on this one, but I wanted my pen to be color by class. So I could pick and choose what is referenced by the class and what isn't. So classes can be really, really powerful in that way to be able to edit visual styles for things. I don't like using classes for document organization. I don't like saying, in a viewport, turn off all of my lighting pipe class, and that's how I turn off all my things. I really like to stick to layers for that. I like to keep those things as separate as possible. There is a little overlap here and there, but for the most part, I try to keep classes as styling tools, layers as organizational tools. Question here, when I change the class, it doesn't want to show on the paperwork. So if you change the fill and stuff like that of some of the objects, depending on, there's a bunch of different settings that could be, but you want to make sure that you, if you gray out a layer or something like that, I don't think it'll show you the actual color class. So take a look at your class visibilities and your layer visibilities and see how those are. There could be another setting somewhere that I just don't know about that's preventing that from showing up on the paperwork. I've never experienced that before. Question, how did I get Vectorworks in dark mode? I think this is a 2020 thing. Of course, I'm on Catalina here. I don't remember if this is an option. or not. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, my system, my Vectorworks is in, or excuse me, my Mac OS is in dark mode all the time because I hate light mode now ever since it became a thing in Catalina. And so I'm sure there's a setting somewhere for it to override it, but I have it turned on that way on the system level. So all my apps that can support it do it. Here we go. Back to the future for, back to my old AutoCAD days, do a drafting on a black background, right? You want to talk about easy on the eyes. Woo! Having flashbacks to AutoCAD there. Okay, so the last thing I will touch on, and again, feel free to throw any questions in there, is the Lightwright integration and how I use it. So I'm not going to go super in depth into Lightwright. Excuse me. For those of you who follow my work, you know that I use Lightwright kind of as a plugin almost for Vectorworks. So I don't really use Lightwright to do my paperwork or anything like that. I use Lightwright for a way to quickly edit a lot of data on my plot. So just for simplicity's sake, I'm not going to use one of my larger shows for this. We're going to just use this small, like, little crappy stage that we made. I'm going to add a couple more instruments to it just so we get a variety here. Maybe we do some, maybe a source 4 par or two here. And you see how powerful it is to have those little loci there to be able to snap to that. Of course, you can accomplish similar things with like a grid. You know, you can use a grid, you can do all kinds of stuff like that, but I like this. You also notice that I've got in all of my instrument symbols, I have that same invisible center line thing in the background of all my symbols. Can't see it when you print, but it gives you a snapping point all the way through the fixture. That's been a super, I guess it's not in my pars for some reason, but in the Lecos, it's a super handy tool to have. Again, it doesn't affect anything, but it gives you just another like a center line snapping point to be able to use. Okay, so I've got a couple of instruments here. I'm going to go to Document Settings, Spotlight Preferences, and under Lightwright, I'm going to do a complete export, and I'm going to put, I actually don't know where this file is saved, so I'm just going to put this on my desktop here. Boop, 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 desktop. And now if I come in here to Lightwright, I'm going to link to my Vectorworks file, Untitled 3. What a great show name. And boom, I have my instrument information there. So obviously I've got no other information in here at all about these instruments other than the position that they're on and the instrument type that they're on. So what I do is I use Vectorworks at this point to come in here typically, and I put my purposes in, I put my colors in, stuff like that. Maybe I'll go through my plot, I'll put all of my front light in, then I'll come back over here to to Lightwright, and I'll update everything about those fixtures. So it's kind of a back and forth workflow. That video that you were watching in the beginning of this while the countdown was happening, that was a time lapse, and you can see me going back and forth a lot in Vectorworks and Lightwright to be able to edit data back and forth. So I can come in here, I can say, all right, well, this is a top wash. Typically I do everything in all caps, but my caps lock doesn't appear to be working. Form. Oops, I mean to do that. Put all that stuff in there, and then when I come back to Vectorworks and I click on an instrument, that information shows up for me now. So it's a really powerful way to get data back and forth. Again, that's something probably most people know. I'm not really, if you're doing a lot of lighting drafting, this is something you know already. So again, I use Lightwright not necessarily for my paperwork. Really, my involvement with Lightwright ends at this worksheet screen. From here, I take a CSV out of it, and I import all of the data into my paperwork program that I built in FileMaker, which you can find some documentation of here on my YouTube channel. And that's where I do all my paperwork generation. And that's just because of the visual style that I wanted, that I couldn't accomplish in Lightwright. One more thing we should talk about real quick is label legends. So I have some built-in label legends that I use on all my shows. And they're based on fixture types and orientations. So I gotta find it here because I'm not in my base file. Where is it? Use legend. Of course, I don't have any label legends. So let's go to an actual show example here. Overhead instruments. And we wait for it to catch up with me. So if I look at this guy right here, he's got a legend attached to him, boom top facing this way, or boom facing this way with the channel circle on the top. You know, there are options within the Label Legend Manager to automatically flip things. I find it easier and more predictable just to have a library of label legends that you use for different oriented fixtures. It's a little bit easier than dealing with that one for some reason that's being pesky and not wanting to rotate in the way you want it. So our label legends are pretty simple. You know, I've got a channel circle, I've got a unit number, and really that's all that's visible. It looks like here I've also got probably a gobo thing and a purpose field that might be turned off right now. But they're really simple, and of course I have ones for different symbols as well. One cool trick that I use a lot, if you're not familiar with it, let's say I had a new lighting type like this Sola, and what if I came in and I had this basic legend on it, right? I don't want that circle all the way out here on that, so I can actually click, and if I get my diagonal crosshair there, I can move individual parts of this symbol around. Now you can do that on a one-off basis if you want to. Let's say there's a single fixture, and this happens sometimes, like if I've got two fixtures that are overlapping in a little bit, I might just nudge one of the channel circles over a little bit. But I can also take this, and if I go to, a label legend, I can create a label legend from that instrument that I just modified. So for some reason I wanted my channel circle here, I could take that, I could create a new legend based off of how I've laid this out, and then apply that to other lights of that type. I find that editing a label legend this way is more powerful and easier just in my mind than it is when you do when you use the tools in the lighting label legend manager. This is because you're looking at in a real world symbol. And sometimes what I'll do if I'm making one for the first time, I'll throw a bunch of dummy data in each one of the fields so I can move it around exactly how I like it. And then I go in and I make a label legend from that symbol. A couple questions here. Yeah, so 2020 is the one that has dark mode. 2019 does not have the option, and I believe it follows whatever you have on your system. Question then, can I go through creating or modifying a custom lighting symbol? Yeah. So, I'm actually going to have to cut this short in about 5 minutes because I've got my other Zoom call to jump on in a little while. So I will do that really quickly. But basically, I'll show you this. Let's do a source for... yeah, we'll do one of these, for example. Let's do a 26-degree tungsten LED. So that's not a tungsten fixture. It's the tungsten emulating LED that they have. Oh, that's a different drawing. Let me go to the actual drawing that I'm working in, Mike. And we'll edit. So I'm going to edit these 2D components. So if I close my resource browser here, as I wait for my computer to catch up again, you can see that this symbol is made up of 3 distinct things. If I ungroup this for a second, oh, I guess it's only 2 distinct things. So I've got this little cross line here. All this is 2 lines. That's what's designating it as a 19-degree fixture. And then I've got another symbol instance. And this symbol instance is that base symbol that I showed you before. So I got that base symbol came in from Steve Shelley's soft symbols, right? So if I go and double click on that, it's going to take me down the rabbit hole a little bit further. And now you can see that that even has a symbol on top of it. These, the tungsten dots, right? So I can go even further down that rabbit hole. It's like nested data all the way up. Stand by. So if I move these crosshair, the computer. So hopefully it won't crash on me here. There we go. If I move this back over there, you see that all this is basically just a symbol referencing that base fixture and then a couple of lines on top of it. I could do the same thing if I wanted to type out 19. I could put that in there if I wanted to. And now that text box will just be superimposed on top of all symbol instances of that type. So then within this, if I don't select anything and I come over here to data, this is where I can change all that stuff about it. I can change information about it, what size gel frames it has, what the beam spread is, all of that kind of stuff. That's all found right here. So that's kind of, I realize that's not super informative. Hopefully it gives you a little bit. Maybe I'll do a separate one of these one time where we go super in depth on creating a symbol from scratch. Again, I've only got like 3 or 4 more minutes before I need to jump on another call, so I can't go super far in depth with that right now. Showing how to create a label legend. Yeah, absolutely. I'll do that real quick. So like I said, like for me, I like just modifying it live, but if I had to create a new one, this is what I would, you have to forgive me, it's been a while since I've done one from scratch. So I'm going to add a new, and I'm going to choose a symbol. So let's say I want to make a Parcan label legend. So I went to Spotlight, Label Legend Manager, added, and now I'm going to name this Parcan. And within here, I'm going to then choose which fields I want. So I'm going to usually want not necessarily purpose, I'm going to want a unit number, I'm going to want a color, I'm going to want a dimmer, and a channel. And really, let's just say those are the 4 things we need. So one important thing, I've been doing some portfolio reviews for USITT and looking at some plots this last couple weeks. And one of the things I've noticed is a lot of plots that are the channel numbers, they're all over the place. You have to turn your head back and forth, upside down, left side, right, to read it. So if you want your channel number to always be oriented straight, use this right reading field here. Now what I will say to that is that works really well if you're using a circle as your container for the channel. If you're using an oval, obviously it doesn't. Does it work? I guess it depends on how you have your symbol laid out. It actually might work. I should test that here. Then within container type, I can come in here and I can choose which one of those containers I want. And those container types are referenced back in the resource browser. So channel is going to be in an oval, dimmer would be in a hexagon, and that's it. I'm going to say yes here. Great. Once I've got it in there, I'm going to edit my 2D layout. We wait for my computer to catch up. And you can see I've got my symbol there. And I can start dragging these things on top where I want them. Obviously, that's massive. So I could change that. I could change the font size here, make it nice and small. The cool part about this is you can nest class information in all of this. So you notice that the Vectorworks automatically created some classes for me. It created a label unit number class. So right now, some of this stuff is all by class. I could change these things in one fell swoop if I wanted to by going in and changing that actual class color. So if I want all my unit numbers to be red, as long as this field in my label legend is color by class, I could do that, which is pretty cool. And so I'm basically just going to drag these where I want them. Again, not being super precise here. And exit that. And let's go assign it to a fixture. So let's just put it on this color source par here, for example. There it is. And you can see now I've got that all there. So I want to actually check and see if I think it actually does rotate the oval. As I was saying that, I was like, wait, was I wrong about that? It does. So using that right reading thing rotates your container as well as your text. So that's great. One last little thing I'll point out before I wrap up. One thing that drives me nuts, have your fixtures going one of 4 directions, up, down, left, right, right? Nothing worse than seeing a front of house pipe where like this fixture might be focused over here, but draw it straight, right? Don't draw it facing over there. If I'm looking at a 2-dimensional plot, I want to see a rough idea of where they're focusing, kind of using those cardinal directions. It's going to make it easier to read. It's going to make the data, the numbers, the data, all that kind of stuff easier as well. One exception to that, sometimes I'll do 45s for box booms and stuff like that, but you should always have kind of a uniform orientation on your fixtures. Just a cleaner drafting, better looking drafting that way. Okay, so again, tonight I am going to be going live over on the Limelight Wired page with Mike Berger and Chris Warner and Rain, and we're going to be chatting with a whole bunch of people from Martin, from Verilight, from TMB, from a bunch of places, kind of doing a wrap up of all of the stuff we saw at the virtual happy hour today. And then next week, I'm going to be back here live on YouTube with Abby and Dalton, and we're going to be talking kind of all the way through our process. We'll have lots of cool examples. We'll have pictures. We'll have some show file examples to show you kind of how we lay out our show files. We're going to talk about stamp and how we use it. We'll see where it takes us. I'll put up some question stickers on Instagram sometime next week. So if you have specific questions you want us to answer, you can reach out there at that time. So I have approximately 2 minutes before I need to go jump on another call. So if there's any other questions you'd like for me to answer, please go ahead and throw those in the chat, and I will do my best to answer them. Otherwise, I will see you all next week. Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Hopefully there was some useful information here. So there's a good question. Are my person objects found within the resource browser? Yeah, I think that's where we have them. I think they're symbols. I don't actually, the person figure you see here, this might be Jess's, this might be Dalton's, I don't know. It's one of the things when you have a lot of people working on plots, and we kind of go from show to show, is that they end up being, you end up getting some symbols that kind of go. But, you know, having symbols is nice because, again, it's that idea of having nested data and reference data. Reference data is more powerful than absolute data in so many cases in our world, in our lighting world. So, all right, everybody, I'm going to jump off. I hope everybody had a good time. I will see you all on the internet. Have a good night.